Internet! I want to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 with full spoilers. This is going to be my spoiler-filled review. Unfortunately, I'm not home. I am in Rome. That is the Tiber River. That is the Palace of Justice. I'm surrounded by such splendid beauty, but Guardians of the Galaxy 3 meant a lot to me, and it's one of my favorite MCU films of all time, so I wanted to give some of my spoiler thoughts before too much time went past, even though I'm sightseeing. So this is going to be a stream of consciousness, some of the things that I really want to discuss, again, spoilers, while I'm bopping around Rome. So enjoy some staggering sights, and enjoy me walking by the Tiber, thinking about Guardians. Now, Guardians 3 for me was, I think, the beautiful, beautiful conclusion to a trilogy that is the strongest comic book trilogy of all time. I honestly think it should be in the conversation of a strongest trilogy of all time. We've got this weird Asterix with comic book films where we separate them from other films. I'd put it up against the Before trilogy. I'd put it with Lord of the Rings, you heard me. I'd put it with any great trilogy. And the hardest thing about sticking a trilogy is you've really got to land the third one. There's escalation from first to second, and then usually the second or third falls apart because everyone's trying to do too much. James Gunn had the unenviable task of also having Gamora go away. Gamora died in another film that wasn't his. The Russos did apparently ask permission, but I cannot imagine the stakes of having a love story as beautiful as Gamora's and Quill's and having that shift between 2 and 3. Now, apparently, one of the original ideas was to kill Gamora in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but being a movie about father and son, they went with the Yondu angle as well instead. And I think that really, really beautifully worked for this film, because one of the things I like most about this film is it was a meditation on loss. It was a study of not death, but loss. And since all the marketing made us feel like the Guardians were going to die, we then got to look at loss in a different way. The loss of friendships, the loss of a team, the loss of brotherhoods, the loss of love. And one of the most beautiful lines, I think, in that whole experience was, "I bet we were fun." And that line really broke me in a way I didn't expect. It was one of the most painful, cutting lines I've heard in any relationship movie. And that's why I specifically mentioned the Before trilogy. I'm going to pull over in case this is really windy. I honestly think what that line did was kind of sum up the team, the experience. Not only was it Quill and Gamora, but it was everyone. And it was obviously about them specifically, but when you look at the Guardians, I bet we were fun. That's the end of the movie. That's the whole experience. And it's also how many relationships is it like you just grow apart, you change as people, you change as adults. And that's what relationships are. Like, marriage ends more often than not in America because, people change. I bet we were fun. And that really just hit me. It was also beautiful to see certain details of evolution of, Groot isn't the same Groot that we met in the first film. That is his son. So having Groot mirror the people around him. The first Groot, the one we met in the first film, is, he grew up on Planet X. So he's a lot more angular and stoic and just rigid, and he didn't know as much love. And then this one dances and knows love and is jacked because he grew up around Thor, and he's snarky because he grew up around Rocket. He had his teen phase. We got to see a totally different Groot. And then at the very end, just like Gamora, we spoke Groot because we understood we were part of the family. So I love you guys. We got to hear because we were part of that family, and that is so beautiful. I personally love the fact that no one died. I love the fact that we spent most of the film wondering if anyone was going to die. I love the fact that it manipulated us. I love the fact that it played us like an equalizer. It played certain levels. It shifted things up and down. And the way the movie balanced trauma and joy, the way the movie balanced what it meant to felt pure glee and friendship and teamwork, and then pure trauma. The way the movie juxtaposed sadness and happiness was so, it left you in this weird state of just emotion. And I think that's why it should be in the conversation of trilogy, because all of these films, the first one being about, mothers and sons, the second one, fathers and sons, and the third, to me, about friendship and relationships in all forms. And the teamwork they showed, as a superhero team, they obviously had one of the greatest, if not the greatest team fight in the MCU. That hallway fight, continuing the Marvel love of hallways, that hallway fight in that oneer with some of the best CGI I've ever seen was fucking incredible. The way they built the relationship between Mantis and Drax, the way that Drax was never meant to be a destroyer but a father, the way Mantis became this MVP of empathy and how important empathy is, the way she was one of the stronger Guardians because of what she could do, and you could physically see that with those titans of monsters, the way all of it up-leveled the characters while building on their arcs, but also making them more powerful, like sequels need to do. They need to make things bigger, and this movie was big, it was insane. The High Evolutionary is in conversation for, top Marvel villain. I'd put him at like 3 or 4 of all of the Marvel villains. We're 40 properties in, and this guy landing that high is just incredible this deep into the MCU because he's so hateable. He's so just awful, and there's not many moments where you can identify him with him because, like, he's pretty much pure evil, but you also go like, okay, this guy's trying to, in his mind, change things. And that line from Rocket of, he doesn't want things to be better, he just doesn't like things the way they are, is so many people. And so much of what we look at in this world, and so much this conversation of, like, they finally made a non-political film. Holy fuck was this movie, if you look at the actual state of the world, topical and political, unfortunately. In that the world has those issues, not that comic books, which are by their nature political, infused in there. It landed so many things. It reminded me of experiments on people in our past. It reminded me of, experimenting on animals is one of the most horrific things you could see on film, and they fucking made you feel everything because people love animals. People love these creatures that, like, bond to us, and they make us feel more human because they love us so unconditionally, and then they take a creature that is an animal and humanize them. They take these 4 creatures and make them us in different ways, and it's just this horribly beautiful, sad subplot of the past where Rocket is all of us. We all feel, othered. We all feel like the underdogs. We all feel like we want people's approval, but we don't want people's approval, and that story with Rocket is just crushing. So you've got the Gamora Star-Lord story, which I open with. You've got Rocket, who's the protagonist, the whole beautiful, messy thing. And that ties you so angrily to High Evolutionary, who, again, one of the great villains because he is just fucking with things because he has the arrogance to think he has the right to. He thinks he's better. He thinks he's this god, and he makes himself one. And I loved that they built an entire planet, and it was horrific to see it all go to commit this giant genocide of ending a planet. What's bigger than genocide? What's the planet scale genocide? And then that tying to Rocket, which we thought from the trailers it would, but we felt so much more in so many interesting ways. And I loved the 4 of them, and I didn't think I could love Rocket anymore, but looking back at conversations he had with Yondu and looking back at some of his lines that they clearly set up for a long time for this ending was absolutely wonderful. And that's why I think it should be one of the great trilogies. So yeah, this was rambling on the Tiber River, but I really wanted to talk about Guardians and some of the elements I loved. I loved the sense of closure we got. I loved how, through those 2 post-credit scenes, we might, get more Star-Lord, but I kind of love where it ended. I kind of hope we don't. I kind of want that story to be over, and maybe we get, more adventures with the other Guardians, which is what James Gunn wants with another director. But I think it goes without saying that DC's in great hands. I've been pretty publicly saying that for a few months, much to a lot of angry people's chagrin on Twitter. What an absolutely stunning piece of cinema. I loved it more than I thought possible, and I hope this rambling made sense. Yeah, I want to talk about this more with, like, notes in front of me because I feel like I definitely missed a few hundred things, but to me this is the number 3 MCU film of all time. It actually passed Guardians 1 for me, which I did not think was possible. Guardians 1 is number 4. It's just so joyfully sad, and that's life sometimes, and I needed to love those characters as much as James Gunn does one last time, and I wanted to share in that love, and it was such a beautiful experience. The fact that I'm, like, dying to see it as soon as I get back is a good sign. I'm in fucking Rome and I'm thinking about Guardians. So those are some thoughts. Much love, y'all. Sorry this was long and rambling. I can't stop thinking about this fucking movie, which is what I wanted. Guardians 3. Holy shit. James Gunn, thank you. Insert later from hotel room because I can't believe I forgot this. The MVP of the film for me, and one of the MVPs of the entire MCU, I want to give some love to Nebula. Karen Gillan absolutely crushes Nebula always. I love the arc that Nebula has had in the MCU. I would argue it's one of, if not the best arc in the MCU, and she does it largely off camera. If you think about the first film, she is almost the antagonist of the film. In the second Guardians, she's effectively
at odds with Gamora the whole time, and doesn't really bond with the Guardians fully. And then off camera, you start to see her kind of loosen up a bit, especially when it comes to Rocket in Infinity War. You see her kind of like this shell breaking happening, and then we find her in a position of total remorse and sharing in trauma throughout the arc between Infinity War and Endgame, and bonding with Tony Stark, and all of this happening in limited screen time, especially compared to other people. And then in Guardians 3, she is a fully formed, very different person. The arc from her being this broken creature designed by Thanos, this thing made for violence, manipulated over time and broken. And I honestly think that's why Drax was changed so dramatically, is the Destroyer was Gamora. And sorry, the Destroyer was Nebula, and the way they're able to tell that story from Destroyer to someone that keeps the team together, someone that is the glue of the Guardians, someone that takes care of Quill, someone that cares so much for Rocket. I also love that Gamora was so maternal towards Rocket, and that instinct that Gamora has towards Rocket, even when she can't remember knowing him is there. The moments between Gamora and Rocket in Guardians 3 are so special because there's something inherent, something motherly, something maternal, something beautiful in that friendship. Also, the elements of Rocket wherein he has the "I'm not a raccoon" paid off with that beautiful moment, but the last thing he says in heaven, the last thing he says in that animal oasis where animal heaven is to his love, to Lila, is "I'm not a raccoon," and that gets cut off. And then his acceptance of who he is saying "I'm Rocket Raccoon." In all the naming schemes of all of Marvel, I honestly think "I'm Rocket Raccoon" is the most powerful use of that name. And the fact that the last thing he says to Lila is "I'm not a raccoon," and the first thing upon embracing who he is accepting he's a raccoon and seeing those small raccoons, those arcs, those deliveries. So Nebula, I mean, what an MVP, and what a passionate performance. And then the delivery of that receiving love from Gamora, and then the receiving of love that Rocket feels, and then acceptance of who he is. Beautiful little addendum there. Apologies for my extended diatribe.